Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Cats Chats and 88 Keys. My name is Jane P.
My name is Henry.
And we're here with you, bringing you some more Beethoven. This is the second of our 10 Beethoven violin sonata cycle. Last week, if you tuned in, you'd have heard the fifth, the Spring Sonata. And we're going to give you the next one today. This is the sixth sonata, Opus 30, number 1 in A major. A work very, very different to the Spring, despite the fact that these early sonatas were all composed months, max a year, aside from each other.
It comes from quite an interesting time in Beethoven's life, this sonata. So it was written, well, the set of Opus 30, so this one, number 7, the C minor, and number 8, G major, they're all published in May 1803. And this is an interesting time in his life, full of creative output, because he had just come back from Heiligenstadt, which is where he went for quite a lot. He was there from April to October the previous year, so 1802, and he went there basically to escape the hustle and bustle of busy life, to try and recover from the nascent problem at the time, which was him losing his hearing, of course. And he went there on recommendation from the doctor to actually try and come to terms with it, and the thought that if he was working less hard as well, it would naturally just get better. But sadly, of course, as we all know, it didn't. But it's from that time that he wrote the famous Heiligenstadt Testament, which was this incredibly sad letter to his brothers, where he basically says that he was close to suicide, or was going to commit suicide, if not for his art. And there's a great quote from the actual testament which I wrote down, which was, "Only art it was that withheld me. It seemed impossible to leave the world until I had produced all that was called upon me to produce." So this sonata comes from after that, when he had decided that he went back to the city and then started writing and working, and enjoyed a period of success like never before, both professional and financial, and that's where this sonata emerges from.
And I love the fact that it's couched within that period of time, because one might expect, especially with any kind of stereotypical perception one has of Beethoven, that a time when he was battling with this impending deafness that was giving him suicidal thoughts, and he was also writing to his friends saying, I can no longer go to social gatherings, I just lock myself away in my room, in my house all the time, because how can I go somewhere and explain to people that I can't hear anything they're saying and that I'm deaf and that I'm supposed to be this great composer? So he was in an intensely dark place, and I think it's extraordinary how much light comes out in his music from this time. In a subsequent week, we will be giving you the next sonata, the seventh, and that's a very dark and stormy affair. But this one is so fresh, so light, so genial, and there's a good amount of wit and humour sprinkled around, especially for Beethoven, who is not always the man most keenly associated with such an emotion. A much wiser man than me described the opening of these three Opus 30 sonatas as challenging the audience to reconceptualize what they think of as a beginning. And I love that with respect to this sonata particularly, because Beethoven, anyone who tuned in last week and heard the Spring, that starts with the most ravishing melody. We are in no doubt at all that this is a lyrical, melodic work. What Beethoven is already pivoting to now is a method of composing that is not as melody-based. It's much more interested in ideas, in very tiny motivic fragments that will normally either be hallmarked by a rhythm or by a particular pattern of notes. And what he does here at the beginning of this work is just throws in 2 or 3 of these that aren't particularly connected, that aren't particularly long, and aren't particularly melodic. You won't go home whistling them. And it strikes me as somewhat akin to the kind of cook who won't really know what they're going to cook. And they'll just start throwing 2 or 3 interesting things into the pan and then kind of figure it out as they go along. And I think that's something that I've always thought of as a keen difference, if you like, between Beethoven and maybe someone like Mozart. With Mozart, you get the impression that from the inception, he knew the end point. And it's sort of this immaculately conceived organism that just poured from him. Whereas with Beethoven, I feel like he starts and then kind of works it out as he goes along, and he takes turns that he wasn't thinking of taking at the beginning. Which is why I think you get this kind of beautifully imperfect struggle in his work that somehow always ends somewhere that feels right, but in no regard somewhere that one would have expected at the beginning. So maybe we'll just give you a little taster of these opening themes, because the whole movement is built on these fundamental raw materials, if you like. The first one is mega short, and it's a tiny little whittle in the left hand. Just a little pattern of quick notes that go up and down. And that's it. And that becomes a real hallmark throughout the whole movement in terms of transitioning from one theme to another. In terms of capping off the whole movement itself at the end. And then you indeed have it in the last bar. And so there's a lovely little motto that kind of binds us together. The second one is much more mysterious, and what he does is, I was reading that this work was composed at a very similar time to the Eroica Symphony, his third symphony, which starts in a very similar way to this, where these three different elements are presented, and they all kind of weave on top of each other and create this amazing tapestry, but they're not necessarily particularly connected, or the direction of travel is not known at the very beginning. So after the whittle, the left hand of the piano has one line, the right hand of the piano has another line, and on top of that enters the violin, and it creates this incredibly mysterious atmosphere. We don't really know where we're going until the whittle interrupts us again. In a sense, that's the arrival point, that's the start point of the movement, and everything that's come before that has been like disparate molecules in the ether, slowly finding each other and coagulating, and then suddenly we have something a little bit more concrete. I was thinking about this earlier, I think over the course of the whole sonata, which is about 25 minutes, I think there's probably 3 tunes that there's a chance you'll go home remembering, which is pretty thin on the ground. But I think because of the paucity of them, when they arrive, they come like manna from heaven. So the second main theme of the first movement arises from a whittle, and then another motif that he sets up that's going to become very crucial in the development section, which is super simple. It's just some kind of lolloping octaves going up the piano. Out of that suddenly comes this incredibly winsome, charming melody. Beethoven being Beethoven, he never lets us sit anywhere comfortable for too long. So, the violin takes over that beautiful melody, the piano has this gorgeous rippling accompaniment, and suddenly we pivot to a harmony we absolutely weren't expecting. Before long, we're in a kind of quite stormy C-sharp minor section. The main structure of a first movement is that you present your themes, so you've heard a few of them already. Then you have a development section where you take those themes and play lots of different games with them. And then you have a recapitulation where you reassert the themes, and some of the themes that took you to a foreign key, you re-establish in the home key, and that's what brings the movement to an end and gives us a feeling of journey and progression. Some of the fun ways in which he develops these themes is a little bit of fugal writing. Fugal is where you have one tune, and then before it finishes, it starts somewhere else in a different hand or a different register on a different instrument, and then they layer up over each other. So if you remember this beautiful second subject, we then have this turned into a fugue. just after this, he does an ingenious bit of writing where he marries the lolloping octaves with the whittle. If we play from 118. Yeah. That's probably the only other motivic element that's worth hanging on to in this movement, that kind of exposed, unaccompanied, rising scalic motif that he often uses to bridge one section to another. Beethoven, I think, more than any composer hitherto, understood where the maximum moments of drama were in a piece of music. And as you might already have thought, the transition back to the recapitulation, so after this long development section, or at least varied exploratory development section, the means by which the composer returns us to the opening is a chance always for something magical and extraordinary to happen. And we talked about that last week in the Spring Sonata, and it's exactly the same here. Beethoven takes us via two of those rising scales into this extraordinary held section where time seems to stand still and we just very slowly slalom through these keys, feeling more and more lost, until suddenly the important harmony is reached and he brings us home. 1, 3, 8. I think that's about it for the first movement. Second movement is an absolute winner. So fundamentally in music you can move, normally when you change keys, you move up a fifth or you move down a fifth. And if you move up a fifth you tend to brighten the atmosphere, and that's why in the first movement the secondary key will be up a fifth, because it's sort of a challenge and then it's something to release from and come home to at the end of the movement. If you go down a fifth, you release some of the energy. So it's very, very customary for second movements, the slow movements, to be down a fifth, because they're a bit more relaxed, they're a bit more soulful, they're often the emotional heart of the work, and they give us that kind of feeling of comfort and glow. And this is what we have here. The music itself has two things that make it extraordinary, and it's not really the melody. The violin melody is, I want to say, fairly run-of-the-mill in and of itself. There's a lot of repeated notes, there's not a lot of rhythmic interest, but what he does is two things. First of all, he puts a shocking great accent, a lean of expressive warmth on what would normally be the weakest part of the bar. We've got 4 beats in the bar, and normally your strongest beats would be 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. And instead here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And that gives us an incredible feeling of yearning and tugging of the heartstrings. And the other thing that he does is in the third bar, magically, he pivots to the relative minor, which we're not really expecting at all. And the colour change from that is absolutely sublime. Underpinning this incredible melody that just sits on top like the most resplendent soaring eagle is this dotted rhythm in the piano that pervades what is quite a long middle movement and gives us this feeling of inevitability and a slightly heavy tread.
It's like a heartbeat almost.
Marvellous, incredible. I'm sure you've heard it by now because we played it twice, but he doesn't just go to the minor in the third bar. 2 bars later, he then melts back into a different major, which is even more of a release because it's another fifth down from where we started. So the level of relaxation is even more intense. There's an incredibly wonderful dramatic middle section here. where he's a little bit more bold harmonically. We enter the minor, and where the emotional intensity is ratcheted up a little bit. And then in a glorious moment, we come to rest on the dominant note. So we're just waiting to fall back home. We do this incredible cadenza together, where time stands still. And then when the tune is reasserted, the dotted rhythm is suddenly gone. And the piano instead has these rolling triplets underneath the violin. And the feeling of unbuttoned ease that comes at that point can't be overstated. Should we go from the treble? Magical. Couple of just really cool textures that he sets up before the end. We've had all this beautiful tripletizing, and when the dotted rhythm reasserts itself, it does so in the piano in the most bare, stark, naked sense. And because we then have no bass as well underneath it, the violin melody suddenly sounds very, very fragile. Last line is a series of questions where the silence between them is almost more important than the notes themselves. The silence is ever increasing, ever more pregnant. And when we finally release back to the home key, it feels like we've earned it. The last movement is a theme and variations. So this is, by this time, was fairly a common structure for composers to use. They would present quite a simple theme. In this case, almost banally simple? Yeah.
It works.
Of almost simple banality.
Interestingly, it wasn't originally going to be so simple, because his original finale for this became the finale for the Kreutzer Sonata, which is very, very sort of anxious, tempestuous.
Which is also in A, and is the Sonata number 9, which we'll get to in about 3 months, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yes, and so theme variations, you present this theme, and then each variation is just a chance for you to kind of show off, really. You use the same, the variations are always the same length as the theme, and they follow exactly the same harmonic pattern, so every bar is the same harmony that would have been in the theme. But the pattern of notes is different, and normally they are organised in ascending speed, so it kind of gets more virtuosic. And he kind of follows this game for 3 variations. There's nothing particularly remarkable that happens. But in the 4th variation, well, maybe we'll touch the theme first, so you can just see the level of banality. And so it's not a particularly complicated, philosophical or deep work. And then suddenly in the 4th variation, he does something I don't think I've ever heard before, where he completely disregards what the harmonic framework was for the theme, and the piano acts as a very diversionary, subversive force, taking the music into different keys, different places that we absolutely are not expecting, while the violin is trying to be terribly winsome and coquettish in the interluding bars.
Try.
And that leads on to a 5th variation, which is a fugue. So you've heard reference to that already in the first movement. This traditionally you would put a variation in a minor key, and so what you hear now is the tune that used to be in the major Now in the minor. The music feels not settled. It's not okay. And the music is only going to disintegrate further, and this probably, in my opinion, leads us to the great genius of the whole sonata. At the very end of the theme, there's this tiny little fragment of bar that you wouldn't think anything of if you didn't know why you should think something of it. That's it. And in the middle of the fugue, he completely loses his way. And we end up in a completely unrelated harmony. Lost and suspended in time. And what follows is an entire bridge passage based on that seemingly not that important motif. There's another 8 bars or so where the music just gets obsessed. That is one thing you do associate with Beethoven, this obsessive quality, just gets obsessed with that idea, winds away to absolutely nothing, and then the last variation is a beautifully pastoral, easy, charming one, which has everything from wit, whimsy, passion, folk elements. You can definitely hear all the musicians down the pub. It's very boisterous, it's very gregarious. Twice the music completely loses its way, and we're not quite sure if we're ever going to make it home. Let me look from 189.
Just play.
Twice, where we feel like we don't know where we are, and then he brings us back. And then the last bit of the whole sonata is some of the most charming writing. On the top of the writing in the piano, there's this incredibly pure, refined melody. And then every now and then it is interjected at the bottom of the writing by this rumbling, cantankerous, brutish interjection. Conclusion. I think that's it. Have you got anything to add?
No.
Marvellous. Well, let's do it then. Beethoven's 6th Sonata in A major. Maestro Bobby Kay is being a maestro in far more romantic realms tonight. So Gabby, who has performed almost every role in Cat's Chats, from page turner to cat-cam operator to maestro on the tech, is manning the tech incredibly this evening, which we're very grateful. And this is Katie, who's turning pages. Zoe's here. Kirsty's here. And what an absolute delight that is. Shall we? How's that for you?
Loved it.
Yeah?
Thank you for watching.
It's good for the soul.
If anyone was watching.
So yeah, that's it. We've got our first recording sessions next week, doing this one and the one we played for you last Friday. And anyone who's enjoying watching, there's some links where you can choose to buy a ticket to support us, which is kind of handy because we've basically had no work for like a year at least now, more than a year. And also all the money raised is going straight into the recording project because it's quite a big project. It's about 3 CDs worth. We're going to need about 15 days recording, and it ain't cheap. So yeah, please, if you're enjoying the concerts, please feel free to do that. So that would be lovely. We'd really appreciate it. We'll be back in, I want to say 2 weeks. Yeah,
Yes,
I think so.
2 weeks with number 8.
With either 8 or 7. I'm not prepared to commit at this juncture, but it'll be one of them. They're both cracking, although they're very, very different. And then the other one of those will be the week after, so it matters not. So yeah, very much hope to see you then. I'm getting a big thumbs up from Gabby, which means I need to tell you to like and subscribe. That means the world. And yeah, it's very warm in here. So I think we need some kind of alcoholic refreshment. Thank you very much. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. It's been a pleasure. See you next time.
Thank
Cheerio.
you.